In recent days, the world was faced the problem of rising oil prices. This worries people in Europe, in America and all over the world. As the CNBC reports, the Memorial Day holiday weekend was marked by the fact that drivers were limiting their trips due to record gasoline prices that are expected to go even higher. And gasoline prices cause other goods to rise in price. This happened because the European Union is trying to restrict oil imports from Russia in order not to pay Russia the money with which it finances the murder of Ukrainians. But Russia is the world's biggest exporter of natural gas and the second biggest exporter of the crude oil. As the Harvard economist Jason Furman puts it, Russia is incredibly unimportant in the global economy except for oil and gas. It's basically a big gas station. But I wonder how almost the whole world became dependent on Russia's oil, and on oil at all. I mean, 200 years ago, humanity didn't really understand what oil could be used for. Gasoline was used as bleach, and it was not interesting for any other purpose. First cars with internal combustion engine were powered by coal gas or other kinds of fuel, even ethanol. Yeah, ethanol, a kind of alcohol that was produced from beet, cane or grain, which every farmer had a large amount. And why did people in the 21st century start talking about biofuels as if it was something new? So, here is a brief history of petroleum, which explains how a famous American business magnate helped oil to become important and influential. Actually, petroleum in one form or another has been used since ancient times. Oil in its raw state without refining had been discovered, extracted and used for household purposes, but didn't have any serious impact on the economy. The scale of production was negligible. But in year 1846, Canadian physicist Abraham Gessner first obtained kerosene. 7 years later, a safe kerosene lamp was invented in Lviv. Now it is Ukrainian city, by the way. Kerosene lamp produced a brighter and cleaner flame and replaced the lamps in which whale oil was burned before. The whales were finally left alone. So, it turns out that petroleum saved the whales. The demand for petroleum as a fuel for lighting in North America and around the world quickly grew. In 1859, Edwin Drake drilled a well near Titusville, Pennsylvania, which is popularly considered the first modern well. But kerosene was still quite expensive. 40% of the volume of refined oil was disposed of as waste, and the kerosene produced was transported in open wooden barrels, from which a large amount of substance simply evaporated or flowed out. By the way, thanks to these barrels, the modern unit of volume appeared. An oil barrel is equal to 42 gallons, but in those days it was equal to standard barrel for shipping herring, salmon, or something like that. Well, one barrel cost $16. In modern price it is about $440. A little bit expensive, isn't it? This changed with the advent of the company Andrews Clark and Company, which was founded by chemist Samuel Andrews and two entrepreneurs, Maurice Clark and John Davison. They began to produce their own barrels, agreed on discounts on transportation by rail, and set up production on their own oil refinery. While other refineries would keep the 60% of oil product that became kerosene, but dump the other 40% in rivers, Andrews Clark and Company used the gasoline to fuel the refinery and found ways to sell the rest waste as lubricant in oil, petroleum jelly and other byproducts. They also created the first synthetic competitor for beeswax, paraffin. So, things were going well. Few years later, John Davison abolished the partnership and formed a company, Standard Oil of Ohio. He continued streamline production and logistics, undercut competitors, and absorbed them. Standard Oil became the largest petroleum company in the world. In 1882, company's lawyers created an innovative form of corporation to centralize their holdings, giving birth to the Standard Oil Trust. Oh, I forget to mention that John Davison's last name is Rockefeller. that's not all. The best still lies ahead. But first, let's see what was happening in Russia at that time. In the 18th century, oil was found in Azerbaijan, not far from Baku. In 1804, Azerbaijan was annexed to the Russian Empire. The first oil well in the world has been drilled in Baku in 1848. That is earlier than Edwin Drake did, however, it didn't give oil. And as I said before, first time the technology of oil extraction, transportation, storage and refining were at very low level. People were so smart that they stored oil just in ground pits, and oil flowed back into the ground. The first cylindrical tanks and the first oil pipelines were invented in Russia by two brilliant people. The chemist Dmitry Mendeleev, who is known for the periodic table of the chemical elements, and engineer Vladimir Shukhov. By the end of the 19th century, Russia had ahead of America in oil production. But 10 wells that produce more than 50% of oil belonged to the founder of the Nobel Prize, Alfred Nobel, to the Rothschild family, to the Shell Transport and Trading Company, and to the Standard Oil Company. So, here we are back. By 1885, Standard Oil had become a monopolist with 20,000 oil wells and a huge influence. It had become the richest, biggest, the most feared business in the world. In fact, they controlled the whole country and could affect the political power. Of course, many people didn't like it, especially Theodore Roosevelt, who became president in 1901. He initiated dozens of suits under the federal antitrust law and coaxed reforms out of Congress. The US Supreme Court declared the Standard Oil Group to be an unreasonable monopoly and ordered it to break up into 34 independent companies. Its successors, such as Chevron, ExxonMobil, Amoco, now part of British Petroleum, and Marathon Petroleum, are still among the companies with the largest revenues in the world. Standard's president, John Rockefeller, wasn't too worried about the breakup. He had long since retired from any management role, but as he owned a quarter of the shares of the all resultant companies, and those share values mostly doubled, he emerged from the dissolution as the richest man in the world. More critical was the fact that in 1879, Thomas Edison filed for US patent for an electric lamp. The invention of the light bulb gradually began to erode the dominance of kerosene for illumination. And as you remember, first cars could be powered by ethanol, which successfully competed with other fuel. During the First World War, cars in most countries of the world used ethanol as fuel. Even Henry Ford's famous Ford Model T could run on ethanol. Standard Oil of California opened the first gas station in 1907 in Seattle, but it wasn't in great demand. For example, in Russia nowadays, cafes and stores at gas stations are considered as an annex to a gas station. In the USA, the situation developed exactly the opposite. Gas stations began as an addition to the store. The popularity of oil declined a lot. It was a big problem of the petroleum company. But another player appeared on the field – Anti-Saloon League. They demonized alcohol and tried in every way to forbid its production and sale. Finally, in 1920, the 18th Amendment of the United States Constitution established the prohibition of alcohol in the United States. Who do you think lobbied for the adoption of the amendment? Yep, John Rockefeller. He generously funded the anti-alcohol movement. People argue about whether Rockefeller supported prohibition because of his personal religious views or financial goals. But the fact remains, gasoline, a byproduct of oil refining, which was considered useless, began to be used as automobile fuel, despite the fact that cars on gasoline worked worse. Subsequently, they tried to fix this by increasing the octane number, for example by adding poisonous lead, and improving the design of engines. But that's another story. Meanwhile, there was a revolution in Russia and communists took power. After the arrival of the Soviet power, all foreign businesses, all their buildings, equipment, technologies, everything was nationalized. And when they realized that the demand of oil in the world was growing, they began to look for new deposits in Siberia and other places. So, for now, Russia is the second biggest exporter of the crude oil, and she extracts 12% of the world's oil production. Is that a lot? Okay, that's quite a lot to influence world prices. That's a lot in order to complicate the life of some countries. But is it much enough for children in Ukraine to die for it? Is it really so much that Europe can't refuse it and the other countries can't help it in any way? How do you think?